Kindred Longevity Lifestyles Owners, this is Gavin here with secretsoflongevity.com. I'm going to make you a recipe today, but I'm also going to be speaking at first about what led me to want to make this recipe for you. I want to talk about using substances that increase, or habits that increase dopamine production as a means to reward yourself for accomplishing goals that you're setting for yourself. So a lot of people know that dopamine is one of the main pleasure, and it's also connected to happiness chemicals that's produced in the brain. There's ways in which it's boosted and secreted, and there's ways in which we overtax it and thus develop a dependency or an addiction to that thing that was causing the release, or it just causes us, when we're not doing that activity or engaging in that substance, it can lead us feeling very drained, tired, and not good about life in general. So when you start to recognize yourself and come to realize that we do have these things that motivate us, that can be used to motivate us, it can be used to your advantage. There's a lot of different illnesses, both physical and mental, that can be traced to being a deficiency of dopamine. Everything from Parkinson's to a wide range of mental disorders, from addictions to ADD. I did an interview not too long ago about that. You guys can always check that here if you want to see my recommendations for diet in terms of helping someone improve their cognition around ADHD, ADD, and other mental issues. But essentially, it comes down to having not enough dopamine, and you can't keep your attention. If this is a more significant problem, then you're going to have symptoms of Parkinson's disease, perhaps in the long run. And what we see from things like what you heard me talk about in my possible health benefits of smoking video, again I'll link to that here, and I talked about how smokers have a lower incidence of Parkinson's, and as well as a few other things, but Parkinson's was a big one, and that's because they're getting that stimulation of dopamine constantly. Technically, that is taxing to the dopamine receptors because you're engaging in an addiction. If you were to use it without becoming addicted to it, which has to do with frequency and also quality of what it is you're using, you're going to be able to use it therapeutically, almost like you would any other medicinal herb. So we're going to make some raw chocolate, which is going to have the effect of boosting dopamine. So there's a few herbs we'll use to accomplish this. Chocolate in and of itself is known for its ability to increase dopamine in the brain through two different means. It actually increases the production of tyrosine, which is then made into dopamine. And if it's raw chocolate, which is what we have here, this is only the case with raw chocolate because once it's cooked, this compound is eliminated. Phenylethylamine, also known as PEA, is a compound that is known as the love molecule. It's associated with pleasure, with feeling like you're very open-hearted and easygoing. It boosts and elevates mood, and that's a reason why chocolate's going to be the foundation for this medicinal treat, which you're going to be able to use if you want to use this specific recipe, or anything that you want to use to reward yourself, to keep yourself going on different goals. So for example, say you had a day of different things that you wanted to do. You had a to-do list and you wrote 6 different things. They're all significant projects. You could break them down if you wanted to do it more than just having the 6 items into like each item and having 2 major steps. And if you had like a certain amount of this, or if you were a smoker, or if you really like alcohol, I wouldn't recommend drinking all throughout the day, but alcohol is another substance that will increase production of dopamine when you're engaging in it. But there's also caffeinated products and beverages, so coffee, you can always reward yourself with a cup of coffee if you do okay with it. So that's the thing with a lot of these things. When you don't have control of yourself and you get into addictive patterns, it can be very taxing and draining on the body, and some of these things just simply don't work for some people. I personally have been experimenting with coffee on and off for the last few months, here and there, and while I love the flavor, I cannot handle the caffeine. It really elevates cortisol in me and makes me jittery for the whole day, even just from 1 cup. There's a brief 1 to 2 hour period where I feel really good and productive, but it crashes, and I'm not going to get into the habit of just doing it over and over again throughout the day. But if that's something that works for you, because there are people that have an ability to handle coffee without an issue, then consider that, using that in the way that I'm going to describe here. Personally, I can do chocolate throughout the day and not have any issue with it. That's because the stimulants and the other things that are in chocolate work differently on the body. And for some reason, that works for me, but coffee doesn't. For some people, it will be the reverse. For some people, it'll be preferential that they use sugar in this way. So if you don't have an issue with dental erosion or other problems that could come from sugar, candida, you could use some sort of sweetening thing. You could make chocolate with sweetened aspect to it. I'm actually not going to be putting sugar in this, but sugar hits that reward center in the brain. Another great thing, which really does not have negative side effects except for a very small fraction of the population who is allergic to algae, is E3 Live or Brainon. You've seen me talk about it in its frozen form plenty of times, and there's a high amount of phenylethylamine, which is in the blue pigments, which is very concentrated in Brainon. I'm going to be using the Brainon powder just for the sake of this not being too runny, although it could work quite easily with the liquid because I'm going to freeze it anyways to make the chocolates hard. I personally prefer the liquid when taking it regularly myself, but one way, of course, is just also get the powder and have that on hand for certain recipes and drinks. Another really good thing or activity you can engage in to reward yourself is to watch TV, watch YouTube clips, watch a movie, watch or play video games. Whatever of those things is what really gets you going, gets you content and feel satisfied. It hits that pleasure center in the brain. Instead of letting yourself fall into these patterns of long stretches of time of unproductivity where you're using up all your time doing that thing and then you come out of it feeling pretty drained, I'm guessing, you can instead use it intermittently with other tasks you're doing. So say, I'm going to clean up the dishes tonight, and when I'm done, I'm going to give myself 1 hour of this time, or even shorter. Because if you have a lot of stuff, you might want to do, all your household cleaning through a day, and just break it up and have those rewards throughout the day. And then in the evening, do yourself a longer one if you want. But it sure beats being lazy, sitting around and letting yourself accumulate waste and refuse and disorder all around you. Another great thing for increasing dopamine production in the brain, and this one is definitely has no side effects in terms of negative side effects, is exercise. It also increases the amount of dopamine receptors we have. So if you know how these things work in the brain, you have a compound or a neurotransmitter that comes in, and you need receptors for it to attach to, and then you feel good. If you don't have enough receptors, you can be flooding dopamine all day long, and it's not doing anything because you only have a limited number of receptors. So I'm not saying it's a solution to depression or all these other things where you don't have enough dopamine receptors. You want to be doing things, living an overall healthy lifestyle, and using these little things that people sometimes consider vices in many cases as a way to reward yourself. And a lot of times they have health benefits, even though people see them as vices. So alcohol could be one. You could just let yourself have that one drink at the end of the day, or 2 drinks, whatever it is that works for you, if you accomplish a certain number of tasks throughout the day. So it doesn't have to be broken up, because that also is not going to work with alcohol. You don't want to be drinking all day. But you could reward yourself once at the end of the day too, if you're not as needing such specific motivators throughout the day. So first things first, to make this dopamine producing, enhancing chocolate, we're just going to add several large spoonfuls of raw cacao powder. It's going to be in the realm of quarter cup to a half cup of raw cacao. That was about 8 spoonfuls. Some were smaller because I'm getting to the bottom of the bag here. And to cut it and give it more volume, because I just simply don't have enough chocolate. You couldn't keep it such a rich quantity of chocolate. But we're going to add some spirulina, because some good quality, easily absorbable, complete protein really helps with dopamine production. It also helps balance blood sugar, which I'm doing because I'm not doing sugar with this. But you can always add honey, maple syrup, or even coconut sugar if you wanted to sweeten this up a bit. So that was about 2 tablespoons. Next we're going to add some Brainon, which is also an algae, and a complete protein, but it's much higher in these blue pigments. So I'm sure you're familiar with spirulina. If you can see that color, it's a dark green, whereas if you see this, I don't know if it's going to show up on camera, but it's more of a turquoise. It almost looks like eyeshadow. It's quite sparkly. We're adding about half a teaspoon to this. It actually has a much stronger flavor, so I'm not going to add too much. I'm going to add a little bit more. Total maybe like 3/4 of a teaspoon of brain almond. That's very concentrated. We're going to add a little bit of sea salt, just a sprinkle. I was just use the lid to get a little bit in there. And to give it some semblance of sweetness, we're going to add some stevia powder. This is the green leaf stevia, and it's not quite as concentrated as the white stevia I'm used to. So I'm adding a large half teaspoon of that. It might look like a lot, but it's going to be the perfect amount. I just made this recipe the other night. So this is probably the most significant dopamine boosting herb that's going in here, and it's Mucuna pruriens. I've made a video on fairways in the past right here. You can check out if you want to learn more about it. But essentially, it contains a compound called L-DOPA. It's the precursor to dopamine, and there's actually a drug, L-DOPA, that is used. It's obviously synthetic. It's not made from Mucuna, but it's used in the treatment of Parkinson's, and it's very effective. So this is a really excellent herb to use if you're recovering from any type of addiction, whether it's any of the things I've already listed or something like marijuana. Some people say you can't be addicted to marijuana, but it does create a dependency in terms of the dopamine release you get from it. So that's another thing you could use. You know, it's illegal in most places, but if you happen to be somewhere where you can use it without obviously the ramifications that entails from using illicit substances, that could be another thing you use to reward yourself. But of course, some people that's not going to work for, and you may have been a user of that, and you find you just don't feel the same. I was in that place after being a teenager and using that substance for too long. Mucuna did seem to restore, even several years later, restored some semblance of this pleasure center in my brain that could be activated again because it gave my body what it needed to make dopamine. We're going to add a heaping half teaspoon, close to 3/4 of a teaspoon. And you can find a lot of these things in the links below this video in the drop-down menu. Mucuna is sold at Hyperion Herbs. So is Hoshiwu, which we're going to add a little bit of. I just like to add this to everything that I'm making, just because of its high zinc and copper content, as well as numerous other benefits, which I've spoken about many times before. So what we have here is a lot of powders together. It's a nice mixture of colors: browns, greens, dark greens, turquoise, light green, yellow. And we're going to add the thing that's going to bind it all together and also make it hard, and that's the coconut oil. I've got a very warm apartment, so it's actually liquid at this moment. And we're just going to add about 3 tablespoons maybe. And we're going to mix this in. If I need more, I add more. You can't take it away, so be careful when you do this part. You're going to need less than you think you do at first, because when you're mixing dry ingredients into liquids, the wet parts of the ingredients tend to go a lot further. So other things that people get addicted to and get dopamine overuse or overstimulation from is things like sex or pornography. Obviously there's healthier versions of both of those. I highly recommend getting away from things like pornography because of its addictive nature and the fact that it really damages your ability to connect to someone one-on-one. And there's a lot of people today in the modern internet age where there's so much accessibility and hyper stimulation visually from people in the pornography industry, obviously putting this stuff out there, that it's causing problems in a lot of people's relationships. And that's been looked at quite extensively in psychology, current psychology research today. So take that into consideration. Not trying to tell anyone what to do, I'm just putting it out there as information. Perhaps if you feel like you're addicted to something like that or any of the other things I mentioned, you can, instead of just trying to completely eliminate it from your life, use it as a means to motivate yourself to do things. You have to be very regimented about this and know that you are in charge of yourself, and almost let your animal side of yourself submit to your higher reasoning. So that will allow yourself to become more productive and essentially live longer, because you're going to be getting the things you want to be doing, accomplishing goals, whether they're health goals or business goals or whatever it is you're doing in life. Then that's going to contribute to a more satisfying, long-term, successful life. So we've got it all mixed up. It looks like a black sort of sludge. I might have added slightly too much coconut oil, but it's going to be okay because I've got one more ingredient to add, and that is some mulberries from what I picked earlier this summer. You can check out this video here if you haven't before on the benefits of mulberries. And I'm just picking them off a tree in my area, wild foraging for them, wild harvesting. So we're going to add a fairly hefty handful, a couple dozen berries. They're about the size of small raisins, and they don't have a ton of flavor in them. I was quite disappointed once I dried them how they lost a lot of their wonderful flavor, but they are very rich in resveratrol, a lot of minerals because they're wild food. They're going to be very mineral dense, and a lot of antioxidants and things like that. So it's a wonderful thing to add to a recipe like this. You don't want to add them before you add the liquid because you want to be able to mix all your powders up completely into a paste before adding those. So it doesn't look like a whole lot, as you see here. It's just like a little bit at the bottom of the bowl. But we're going to make 8 or so little chocolate ball things and use those as little snacks to motivate myself to accomplish certain things that I have in mind to accomplish. So just simply need a plate. And by the way, if you can get your hands on cacao butter, that would almost be better than the powder. It'd have a more chocolatey flavor, and sort of goes with the whole vibe of the thing better than coconut oil. Coconut oil is great. So I actually had the camera cut off a few minutes of film. I actually only got 6 chocolates out of them. They're fairly largish, and I wasn't actually doing anything else except spooning them on here so you didn't miss anything. But I popped it in the freezer for about half an hour, and we're back, and they're rock hard. So I'm going to need a fork to actually get it off. Actually, this one slides right off quite easily. So I knew what it was going to taste like because I was trying a little bit of the remnants of from the bowl. I like it quite a bit. Wouldn't be everyone's most palatable choice for chocolate. In that case, I'd recommend more sweetener. You could cut it with anything from whey powder to colostrum, or anything if you wanted to make it milkier. You could obviously not have the spirulina or other algae in there if you don't like the flavor of algae. But for me, this is it's quite savory. It does have a touch of sweetness from the stevia, and overall, it's quite enjoyable. So I'm going to use these constructively in the way that I've described. I'd highly recommend exploring that productivity habit if that's something that you want to implement in your life to attain more success and more productivity. And or you can just make the chocolates for the sake of making some delicious chocolate that has an extra bit of dopamine boosting herbal enhancement. So check out those links below this video for many of the products I talked about to help you make these at home. Let me know in the comments below what you think. If you've ever made chocolate, is there any special way that you go about making it, and just what your thoughts are on raw chocolate in general. So with that, rate and share the video if you feel so inclined, and take care and embrace life without limits.